Okay, if everybody will please come to order. Welcome all to the June 2024 hearing of the Oldham County Planning and Zoning Commission. I am Chairman Greg King. Before we get started, if everyone will please join me in a recitation of the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. And at this moment, please take those electronics, set them to mute for the duration of the hearing. Would like to welcome aboard today Ms. Debbie Krause, who will be filling the vacated seat of Joe Ender. Ms. Krause is committed to joining the commission and serving in this capacity, so thank you for being aboard. We're glad you're here. Thank you. All right. First order of business will be minutes, approval of minutes. Can we go ahead and get a motion on the floor?
So move.
Got a motion to approve and a second. Thank you. Any corrections, edits? Ms. Jones? No? All right. Well done, guys. All right. Any others? Okay, Mr. Douglas. Oh, trap door.
I came here. So I just have one. I think it's Ben Winters on the first page under Commissioner's absence.
Should be plural. Mm-hmm. Anything else? All right. We'll go ahead and go to a voice vote on this. All in favor of approving the minutes as corrected, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, like sign. And the minutes are approved. All right. First order of business. Ms. Edgar, will you read the first docket item? Okay. Sure, let's go ahead and swear staff.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Docket PZ 24-009. An application has been filed by DHJ Properties LLC for a preliminary subdivision plan with waivers and variances for a 134 single-family lot open space subdivision to be known as Dogwood Estates subdivision, located at 3200 Massey School Road, LaGrange. Waivers requested are from the Oldham County Subdivision Regulations, Section 5.12C, to allow lot frontage on a non-local street and an open space cluster to generate an ADT greater than 250 vehicles. And variances requested are from the Oldham County Zoning Ordinance, Section 060-020, to reduce the minimum lot width, the front yard setback, and the side yard setbacks. The property is 60.9 acres and zoned R2 Residential District and CO1 Conservation Residential District.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And Mr. Fogel, you have staff's presentation.
We do. Good morning. Brian Fogel, Assistant Director, Oldham County Planning Development Services. Notification of this morning's public hearing was posted on our website on May 29th. Adjoining property owner notices were mailed on June 5th, and a legal advertisement appeared in the Oldham Mirror newspaper on June 13th. I'm going to orient the commission to where we're located at. It is in the LaGrange area and is in the city limits of LaGrange. We're right here. Exit 22 is right here. If you come south on 53, take Zale Smith Road to where it ends at the intersection of Massey School Road. The property is located here where this red push pin's located at, and more particularly, it's this property right through here. And here highlighted in red off of our GIS would be the property that's before you guys today. This is the intersection of Zale Smith Road, Massey School Road. The zoning in the area is residential of some sort or another. Most of this site is zoned R2. Portions of it along the drainage areas are zoned conservation residential. But the zoning in the surrounding area is residential of some site. As it was read into the record, what's before you all today for your consideration is a request for an open space subdivision that consist of 134 single-family lots on a 60.9-acre parcel. And because open space subdivisions are a creative design that are allowed under our subdivision regulations, it's necessitating the need to ask for some waivers and variances that we will detail for you all. Site history of the property, it goes back to 2013. The Planning Commission changed the zoning on this property to R2 and conservation, and then it was sent to the LaGrange City Council, who adopted the change of zoning. So that's why the zoning that's on the property presently is there right now. And at that same meeting in September, you all approved a preliminary plat for a 37-lot conventional subdivision that we're going to show you a plat of here on the front 15.2-acre portion of the site. And where that is right here. So this is the intersection of Zale Smith Road and Massey School Road. And highlighted in yellow here is what you all granted preliminary plat approval for. Now, when an applicant owns a larger piece of property and they intend to develop it in the future, while you may only be approving this 37 portion, which you all did in September of 2013, you require the applicant to show how they might develop the rest of the property. So that's why you see outside of this highlighted yellow area, these other lots that would have to had come back to the Planning Commission for preliminary plat approval along Massey School Road. In November of 2020, you all corrected your minutes to clarify that any of the widening on Massey School Road occur from the intersection of Zale Smith Road south to the proposed subdivision entrance, which would have been from this intersection to this intersection right here. In October of 2021, the Planning Commission staff notified the property owner that the preliminary subdivision plan with binding elements would expire on September of 2022. This is a copy of the letter that was sent to the applicant notifying them that under the provisions of the subdivision regulation, if you don't start developing that subdivision within a certain time period, the approval for it basically evaporates or it sunsets. So what sunset and went away for preliminary plan approval was this section here, which is why the applicants are back before you guys today, but probably more significantly, they're not proposing a conventional subdivision. They've changed the design to an open space subdivision. So relative to current times, in February of 2024, the applicants had a neighborhood meeting with the neighbors to explain what they're requesting. And then in March of 2024, the Technical Review Committee reviewed and provided technical comments regarding the proposed open space subdivision. In your all staff packet, it was included the meeting summary from that TRC meeting, comments from the county engineer, and also comments from the Planning Development Office. So the current proposal that's before you all is this open space subdivision, which consists of 134 lots. The intersection of Zale Smith Road and Massey School Road is right here. And as is allowed under the open space subdivision provisions, what they're proposing is to have clusters of lots with open space around those lots. So it is a 60.9-acre parcel. Primarily, all the proposed lots are located in the portions of the property that are zoned R2, and the conservation areas are being set aside for open space. The average lot size is 7,082 square feet, with the smallest being 6,600 square feet, which is allowed in the open space provisions, but under that, that means you have to take that lot that's not being designated as part of a lot and dedicate it to the open space. And they're doing that. They're showing that the open space areas in the subdivision consist of 30.89 acres, which is 51% of the total 60.9 acre site, which complies with the subdivision regulations for an open space subdivision. So we're going to get into the waivers and variances that are being requested because this is an open space subdivision, which is ordinary and normal. The subdivision regulations authorize you all to grant waivers. And in this particular case, we have two waivers that really kind of get down in the weeds of the subdivision regulations, but we listed them anyway because they are in the subdivision regulations. One is a request to have lots that confront on a sub-collector street. The subdivision regulations state that anything that has a frontage on a lot in an open space subdivision needs to be a local street. And in this case, and this is highlighted right here, but I want to show you the map because a picture really tells the story. In this case, the portion of the street that's highlighted in yellow, its daily anticipated traffic exceeds what you would expect on a local street. So technically, there's a need for a waiver in that. And we will outline those in a slide about motions towards the end of the presentation here. The other one is a waiver request where you have a clustered section that it has an ADT that would be anticipated to generate more than 250 vehicle trips per day. And that would be this back portion of the lot. And again, the waivers really get down into the weeds of the subdivision regulations. The variances are fairly straightforward. So the subdivision regulations authorize you all to assume the powers of the Board of Adjustments when you're considering a subdivision request, which is what we're doing here for you all today. So in the R2 zoning district, the minimum lot width is 80 feet. They're proposing a lot width of 55 feet, and they're requesting a variance of 25 feet. The minimum front yard setback in the R2 is 35 feet. They're proposing 30, so they're requesting a variance of 5 feet in the front yard setback from you all. And then we've got two that are interrelated with the side yard setbacks. The minimum setback for a side yard in the R2 is 7 feet. They're proposing 5 feet, requiring a variance of 2 feet. And then the R2 is set up to where if you have 7 feet on one side, the other side needs to be at least 18 feet for a combined total of 25. And what they're proposing is to have a combined total of 10, which requires a variance of 15 feet from you all. And this is just a portion of the Oldham County zoning ordinance that shows you those setback standards. And then also in the open space subdivision provisions in the subdivision regulations, it has it listed here that it's anticipated that because you have smaller lots, but the balance of that smaller lots is being dedicated to the open space, that it's probably reasonable to expect an applicant would be asking for a variance, and it authorizes you all to approve smaller minimum setback requirements through a variance procedure, which is why they're asking for the variance with this approval of the preliminary subdivision plan. And the variances are listed here. And then just a few pictures. This is the intersection of Zale Smith Road and Massey School Road. This is looking back towards Highway 53 and LaGrange. This is a picture looking down Massey School Road going away from LaGrange, so it's looking to the south. They're proposing one of their clustered sections right here in this flat area. And that's what this is right here. This is looking directly on the site from Zale Smith Road. And then way back towards the end of the property where Massey School Road, for all intents and purposes, ends, this is looking north up towards Zale Smith Road where the subdivision would be proposed there. So they're asking for three things: waivers from the subdivision regulation design standards, variances from the zoning ordinance setback requirements, and then approval of the preliminary subdivision plan for an open space subdivision. And in looking at this, we're thinking that would probably require 5 motions instead of 7. And what we're trying to do there is kind of economize on your all's motion making, because 7's a lot, so is 5. The waivers could probably be grouped together because they're from the same section of the subdivision regulations, and they all relate to the anticipated traffic on the streets. On the variances, we anticipate that you all would make a variance to either approve or deny a variance in the lot width, and then likewise in the front yard setback. And then we could probably group the side yards together because the side yards are interrelated in terms of what the minimum is on one side and then what the combined totals are on the other side. And then finally, there would need to be a motion for the preliminary plan approval. With that, I'm probably going to pass the baton to Jim Silliman and then be available for any questions.
Mr. Urban.
I just want to add one thing. Brian mentioned that in his site history that in September of 2013, the Planning Commission and then ultimately the City of LaGrange did a zoning map amendment, and that case was different in that the zoning was always R2 and CO. They were just in the wrong location on the maps. And this is a little history lesson. When zoning first came in the county, it was done on Mylars, and I always use my hand, and there were fingers of like creeks and streams or steep slopes, and that's where they placed the CO zoning. In this case, it was once we have more modern technology and GIS, the CO zoning was in the wrong location. It was actually where it was best to build houses, and the R2 was actually where the creeks were. So that zoning case wasn't to change the zoning, it was to adjust the zoning to be appropriate to what was really mapped on the ground. So I just wanted to add that brief bit of history.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. Mr. Silliman.
Good morning, Jim Silliman, Oldham County Engineer and Stormwater Coordinator. So as is usual for a development of this type and size, it's greater than 1 acre of land disturbance. So as usual, we'll have the Kentucky Division of Water, KYR 10 will be required by the applicant, as well as an Oldham County Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Permit. They'll apply for those from my office in the Division of Water and submit construction plans for review. We have observed that there are mapped blue line streams on the property, in addition to a pond that looks like it's being modified to become one of the 4 retention basins. Because of that, any impacts to these streams or pond would require appropriate permitting from the Army Corps of Engineers and the Division of Water in our office, and that'll be addressed during construction plan review. We'll also, during construction plan review, make sure the road design, the horizontal and vertical geometry is in accordance with AASHTO and other acceptable standards at this time. At TRC, a couple of concerns, at the Technical Review Committee, a couple of concerns were brought up with regard to traffic and pavement markings. I just wanted to address our research into those for you. With regard to the traffic, Oldham County subdivision regulations requires, it's got criteria for traffic assessments and traffic impact studies. Traffic assessment would be required if a site generates 20 peak hour trips and if the road that it connects to, the proposed development connects to, has over 1,500 vehicle per day average daily traffic. The other criteria is for a traffic impact study, which is if the development generates 100 peak hour trips or more and enters onto a roadway with 2,000 or more vehicles per day. The site at 134 lots does generate greater than 100 peak hour trips. However, our information that we obtained from KIPTA, the Kentuckiana Regional Planning and Development Agency, indicates that at this location, the annual average daily trips on Zale Smith Road is approximately 1,300. So it doesn't meet the criteria for either the traffic assessment or the traffic impact study. As such, we didn't require either of those studies for this development. So that's why you don't have that, because it doesn't meet the criteria. I think it's notable also that the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet didn't require a traffic impact study simply because their nearest intersection would be Kentucky Highway 53, where Zale Smith intersects it, and that's about 1.33 miles away from this site. So it's significantly outside of their radius. With regard to pavement markings that were brought up at the Technical Review Committee, some residents were concerned about whether or not we would be striping the road. You might have noticed from Brian's photos that Zale Smith Road was resurfaced with asphalt within the past month or two between technical review committee and today. During that process, we determined that pavement markings aren't necessary. There was no evidence that there were ever pavement markings, center lines or white edge lines on the roadway. And at 1,300 vehicles per day at this location, and probably around, I think we saw around 1,800 vehicles per day at Kentucky Highway 53 on Zale Smith Road, it's still only about half of what the criteria would be required for the manual of uniform traffic control devices to add striping. So at this time, we don't deem that necessary. And as this development, if it's approved and is built, it's going to be built over time. If we see that in the future, 5 or 6 years from now, that those are required, we could address it at a later date. But again, even adding the trips generated from this site, it may not meet those criteria. I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silliman. All right, commissioners, questions? Oh, Mr. Williams. Thank you, Jim.
He was sworn in.
How are you all? Do you want me to raise my right hand since I was not here at that moment?
You have not sworn.
I was not sworn in.
Yeah, we're
I
gonna
snuck
need
in
sworn.
afterwards.
Yes, please. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Michael Williams, Oldham County Board of Education, 6165 West Highway 146, Crestwood, Kentucky. You should have the board-approved capacity letter. Took me a minute. I've been working on state reports for the last week, so my brain is a little fried at this moment. Based on the 134 homes, that would net us at this point 21 students. So with all the numbers that play into that, based on our agreements with the county and all of that, would be then that they would receive 25 units per year. And that was approved by our board at our April meeting, I believe. So
All right.
that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. All right, commissioners, your turn. Questions of staff. Mr. Hampton.
Are sewers currently all the way back there?
Sewers are available back there.
Okay. I'll wait for the applicant on the next one.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Douglas.
So we're not talking about any waiver or variances on CO1?
That is correct. What they've done in their design is cluster the lots, which are what are requesting the variances in the R2 zoning district and setting aside the conservation zoned areas for open space.
Okay, for the rest of us that you showed a slide reference CO1, and you mentioned I guess the total square foot of the lots. So you're stating that the open space eliminates the need for a variance for the lots being under because of the open space? Because, I mean, right now,
Yeah,
there's 18 lots and a lot of open space.
right.
But the minimum, I believe, lot size for CO1 is 14,000 some odd square feet.
1 acre.
Yeah, 1
Yeah.
acre.
Yeah. So let me address that. You know, in our regulations, and we came upon this on the Goshen Lane, and this is probably what you're referring to. If you have an open space plan and you calculate your number of lots, any lot that's actually in CO zoning still has to be 1 acre lots, even if there's sewers. And this project will have sewers. So that's really what your question is. Do any of the lots in this development require some kind of adjustment because the lot size is less than 1 acre? And there is, as an example, Lot 10, where the zoning line goes through the backside of the property, but the majority of the property is actually in R2. So as an example, if you look on your plan, Lot 10, our determination is it doesn't need any variance or waiver because, and you really can't waive density.
Right.
Because the house will be in the R2,
Okay.
if that's what you're,
I was referring to that
Yes.
because I marked that down because we just kind of briefly went over that and, I don't know if anybody else here on the commission looks at that, but my next question would be is that when we talk about the R2 standards, and I know we don't do variances for density requirements, but I don't see anything in here that discusses what the new density would be for the new variances, because we know that the minimum density would be, I guess it's 3.63. Do we know what the new density would be if the variance was approved?
if I can answer, it's in the site data on the plan, right where your right hand is flip the page over, flip your right hand towards you,
Okay.
and there's site data, and that has the net density of
I
this
got it.
proposed development.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the last question for you. Somebody else might have one. I lost my train of thought. I forgot it. Sorry.
All right. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Mr. Douglas, one last chance.
You can
Okay.
always ask the
Can
applicant.
come back.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fogel.
All right.
I think that will conclude with staff's presentation. Mr. Swansburg, we'll move into presentation from applicant. You want to go ahead and get your team sworn, whoever will be providing testimony?
Raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, and I will ask for your name and address as you approach the podium, okay? Mr. Swansburg, it's all you.
Mr. Chairman, just making sure my phone is on mute. Don't want that going off in the middle of the presentation. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Mr. Urban, Mr. Baxter, Ms. Edgar, good morning, everybody. Mike Swansburg, 117 West Main Street, LaGrange, Kentucky, 40031. And I'm here to proudly represent DHJ Properties LLC, which is the applicant in this particular matter before you today. But with me, in addition, and we've already got them sworn in, obviously, we've got Derek Triplett and Chad McCormick, who are both engineers with LD&D Design, who may be able to talk more about the technicalities of any questions that you might have better than I can. We also have Billy Delker here, who is the developer in this case and the member of DHJ Properties, and may be able to answer any questions on that front that either you or potentially anyone in the public may also have as well. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about Dogwood Estates subdivision. And this is, as we talked about, and Brian did an excellent job as always in terms of going through this particular proposal. A lot of what I'm going to cover has already been covered by the staff, but I think in many ways it's important for us to reiterate a lot of what we're talking about here. And I'll start off with what I'll call the ask. And that is that we come before you all seeking approval of a preliminary plan, of course, for a major subdivision located on the intersection of Zale Smith Road and Massey School Road within the city of LaGrange to convert this property that you all see on your screen here to this. And this is our open space subdivision proposal. And let's talk a little bit about that. But first, as a lawyer, of course, I always like to say, what are the guiding standards? What might the law be in this case for you all to consider when looking at a matter like this to help guide your approval process? Subdivision regulation, I'll get into the weeds a little bit on this. I'll apologize ahead of time, but I do think in many ways it's important. Subdivision regulations sections 1.2 subs A through K provide guidance for subdivision development in Oldham County. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. One, to guide future growth and development patterns in Oldham County in accordance with the comprehensive plan, to protect and conserve the value of land throughout Oldham County and the value of buildings and improvements upon the land, and to minimize conflicts among the uses of land and buildings, to minimize the pollution of air, streams, and ponds, to assure the adequacy of drainage facilities, to safeguard the water table, to preserve the natural features, and to encourage the wise use and management of natural resources throughout the county in order to preserve the integrity, stability, and character of the county and the value of the land. And lastly, at least for illustrative purposes, to preserve the natural beauty and topography of Oldham County and to ensure appropriate development with regard to these natural features. These are just a couple of examples from within the subdivision regulations. I mentioned the Oldham County Comprehensive Plan a minute ago, and just want to go ahead and note that as well. For your benefit, we would submit that the proposed Dogwood Estates subdivision, which again is an open space concept, which I will talk about here in a second, comports with Oldham County Comprehensive Plan, particularly Land Use Objective LU-1-1, which relates to its compatibility with surrounding land uses, as well as Land Use Objective LU-2-1, which promotes connectivity between neighborhoods and compatibility with adjacent development. That's the Oldham County Comprehensive Plan. We talk about open space, and it's not just for your benefit, but anyone who may be watching or listening today in terms of open space. What is open space? Subdivision Regulations, Section 5.12, identifies open space subdivisions as an alternative to what you might think of in a conventional sense. That's just essentially a blanket development of a particular parcel of land into a subdivision. Open space subdivisions, quote, have the same gross density of a conventional subdivision. However, individual lot size and width requirements are less restrictive, and the remaining portions of the subdivision are dedicated or reserved for non-developmental purposes. It provides for both development on a space and also incorporates green space into a proposed development, really to form a synergistic opportunity for a developer and residents to have both a place to live and also have a place to go in terms of green space that might be around their property, not just the confines of their yard itself. How about Dogwood Estates' plan? This is DHJ's plan. And Brian's already talked about this. The proposed Dogwood Estates subdivision combines 134 proposed residential lots with 30.89 acres, or about 51% of the total 60.90 acre lot of undeveloped open space. So again, for your purposes, the yellow lots, of course, are where residences would go. The green space obviously denotes where the green or open space would be in this particular proposal. And this proposal we would submit meets the technical requirements for an open space subdivision while promoting the retention of green space to preserve the agricultural or rural nature of the surrounding area. So what does the proposed open space concept for the Dogwood Estates subdivision accomplish? One, it preserves the natural features of the current lot. That's consistent with subdivision regulations section 1.2 sub J. And two, it preserves the natural beauty and topography of the area and ensures that development accounts for the natural features of the land itself. That's also incorporated within subdivision regulations section 1.2 sub K. We talk about setbacks, and this is going to get into our variances here in a second. So what are building setbacks for those individuals who, what about the building setbacks, I should say, for those proposed lots that we're talking about? So again, the proposed Dogwood Estates subdivision sits within a parcel of land of which approximately 92% is zoned R2. We've talked a little bit about that already this morning, with the remaining 8% zoned CO1. All of the proposed residential lots, with the exceptions of, we talked about, I think, lots number 9 and 10, there's a very small fraction of 9 and 10 that actually fall within the CO line. But as we talked about before, the houses would be built in the R2 section, so that's why we're talking about R2 variances and not CO variances. All of them we would submit are situated within the portion zoned R2 for purposes of our request and for this particular proposal. So pursuant to Oldham County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, and Brian already highlighted on this screen, the minimum lot width for an R2 zone is 80 feet. The minimum front yard setback is 35 feet. The minimum side yard setback is 7 feet for one side or 25 feet for both sides of adjoining residential lots. That's section 0.060-020 of the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. That said, individual lot size, quote, individual lot size and width may be smaller than that required by the zoning district in which the open space subdivision is located. That's expressly provided for in subdivision regulations section 5.12 sub A. Additionally, any building setbacks may be smaller than the required building setbacks of the zoning district in which the open space subdivision is located, also within subdivision regulation section 5.12 sub A. So again, the subdivision regulations expressly provide that the boundaries for individual lots may in fact be smaller than the normal lot size for a particular zone. So again, the numbers that I talked about before in terms of minimum lot width, for example, the setbacks, et cetera, the subdivision regulations expressly provide that you can, in fact, can consider smaller lots than that, and what you would need to do is go through a variance procedure or variance approval for that purpose. So let's talk about those variances. And I want to make sure, it's important from our perspective to say, you know, we've got 4 variances, and that sounds like a lot. And as a practical matter, of course, that requires potentially 4 votes. But what we're really talking about here, again, is we're just talking about reducing the lot sizes overall. That's what we're actually talking about by doing this. And what we are proposing to do, consistent again with section 5.12a that I just mentioned, is to ask you all to grant 4 waivers as part of, I say waivers, it's actually variances, as part of the Dogwood Estates subdivision plan. Sorry, I did this late last night and I got my words confused on it, so I apologize to you all for that. Section 1, reduce the minimum lot width, like I said, from 80 feet to 55 feet. Number 2 would be to reduce the minimum front yard setback from 35 feet to 30 feet. Number 3 would be to reduce the side yard setback from 7 feet to 5 feet, and then reduce the minimum side yard total setback between 2 lots from 25 feet to 10 feet. And so what I did on this particular screen was to highlight for you all, and again, this is just a rough estimate, don't hold me to exact accounts, I'm not an engineer, is that we've got, for example, the lot width from 80 feet to 55 feet. We're talking again about the width of the lot itself, reducing that amount. This is illustrated by this arrow here. The minimum front yard setback from 35 to 30 feet. Again, we're talking about where that buildable space is for a particular home. And again, this is just a rough estimate, about 30 feet off the setback or off the right-of-way. And then the 7 feet to 5 feet, we're talking about the buildable space between 2 lots, right? And so under the current regulation, 7 feet would be required for just one side, but between 2 adjacent lots, it would actually require it to be 25 feet between the buildable area on each side. And what we're asking you all to do is to give us a waiver, technically 2 waivers, one of them being, again, reduce this from 7 to 5 just for one lot, but then combine those 2 5 into 10 total feet between 2 adjacent lots where you can include buildable space. For purposes of seeking a variance, of course, there is a standard for seeking a variance that we would incorporate into our presentation today. And we would affirmly state on that one, the strict application of R2 spatial requirements would deprive DHA of the reasonable use of the land. The unique conditions driving this proposal were derived entirely by circumstances outside of DHJ's control, i.e. the design of the plat that was originally, essentially the overall plat in which we are trying to build the subdivision was not done through DHJ's doing. It was actually done well before DHJ. And then the proposed spatial alterations resulting from these variances would do nothing to harm the public safety or welfare for the citizens of Oldham County in any way. And again, what we're talking about doing with these variances is simply reducing the per lot footprint in this proposal and preserving the significant amount of undeveloped space overall. That's what we're talking about with these variances. So again, it sounds like a lot with 4, but ultimately what we're just simply talking about is just shrinking the actual lot size and reducing the per lot footprint for each individual lot to be developed on so that we can have a lot of significant open or green space surrounding those clusters. There's a little bit of discussion about traffic and road-related matters. This came up actually in the neighborhood meeting originally, and then it came up in the TRC meeting. Mr. Silman talked about that a few minutes ago. We talked about that at TRC. And what the impact of the subdivision would be along Zale Smith Road. There was some discussion, as we already talked about the quality of Zale Smith Road at that point. And we've already talked about the fact that the county has already repaved Zale Smith Road running through the area that would be the entrance as of now. And we've already talked about the fact that the estimated ADT at the proposed entrance is less than 1,500 vehicles per day, falling short of the threshold needed for a traffic assessment or a traffic impact study under the subdivision regulations. We already talked about it a little bit. I just want to reiterate again that there is no need for a traffic assessment or a traffic impact study because the numbers don't require it. Nonetheless, we are here to ask for 2 variances that deal in some way with traffic. I'm sorry, waiver. I keep saying waiver and variances. It's been a long week. I apologize. Waiver request. Nonetheless, Consistent with 9.1 of the subdivision regulations, we are asking to grant 2 waivers of the subdivision regulations, namely, 1, a waiver of section 5.12C of the subdivision regulations relating to the mandate that residential lots have frontage on and vehicular access from local access streets or private roads only and not subcollector streets. And 2, a waiver of section 5.12C of the subdivision regulations relating to the mandate that, quote, open space sections or clusters not generate an ADT that exceeds 250 vehicles. Talk a little bit about these individually. So per Z&C staff, working with them, Street A's ADT near the intersection with Street B exceeds 500 vehicles, making Street A a subcollector, thus preventing frontage and vehicle access along Street A. My numbers here are a little bit off. I'm going to talk about here in a second, but Mr. Fogel actually made a great slide presentation earlier to illustrate and highlight the section that we're talking about. Once you get to this intersection moving forward towards Zale Smith Road, it now becomes a subcollector street by virtue of the number of vehicles driving on it per day. And under the subdivision regulations, you can't have frontage or vehicle access on a subcollector street. So we're asking for a waiver of the regulation for that purpose. And in support of that, we would submit to you that strict compliance with 5.12C creates an undue hardship given the man-made limitations of the overall plat. And again, I talk about that. It's shaped via man-made parceling, which that's how we get the design to incorporate the number of lots with the open space. We're working within the confines of a border of a plat ultimately. I said more than half the total lots. I was actually looking at the entirety of this street and not the actual frontage here. So I would ask you all to ignore that part of the slide where it talks about more than half, but it would require us to eliminate a significant number of lots on this street on what would be the northern side or to the left here of this intersection if we were not granted this particular waiver. And then number 2, a basis for why we think this warrants approval is that it's part of a complete neighborhood proposal and still meets the basic objectives of the subdivision regulations, particularly section 5.1, which encourages subdivision of land for residential uses and promotion of the county's rural character. So again, that is the first waiver that we are asking you all to approve. The second one, this is actually on your screen. There is actually our original proposal to the Planning Commission staff, and as part of our initial proposal, there is a horseshoe cluster. This is on the southernmost end of the subdivision, which would consist of 31 total lots, and that cluster was estimated to generate more than an ADT that exceeded 250 vehicles, requiring a waiver of the subdivision regulations. That's the one we talked about before, being on the southernmost part of the subdivision. What we would submit to you in response is the current proposal, which came after we received the comments at TRC and worked with staff, is that we've redesigned the southernmost portion to break up the clustered lots into 2 clusters. So you'd actually have one cluster here, which actually would be 18 lots, and then you have a second cluster down here, which would be 13 lots, reducing the ADT from the original estimate and obviating the need for this particular waiver. So we've proposed that as part of the design, we would actually submit that the waiver may not, in fact, be necessary as a matter of law, as a practical matter. That said, to the extent, however, that a waiver is still going to be required, we would still submit to you all that strict compliance with the regulation would create an undue hardship, given, again, the man-made limitations of the overall plat, i.e. how it was parceled out, and then the design, again, is part of a complete neighborhood proposal and still meets the basic objectives of the subdivision regulations, particularly section 5.1, which encourages subdivision of land for residential uses and promote the county's rural character. In addition to just the waivers and variances that we've talked about, there were some other concerns that were raised throughout the course of this particular process that we wanted to go ahead and just address here on the front end. First being at the February 13th meeting, the neighborhood meeting, a concern was raised about possible flooding on Zale Smith Road. And then again, at March 20th, TRC meeting, at least one neighbor had expressed concern about runoff coming into her property. And per Z&C staff, we've proposed, and that this was actually a suggestion after the TRC meeting, was that we look at increasing the number of retention basins to 3 to 4 at this point. I do want to highlight for everyone's benefit that there are 4 separate detention basins within the Dogwood Estates subdivision, which are highlighted in the red circles on your screen, which are designed to address concerns about stormwater runoff and retention. So that is an issue that we have heard to be a concern, and we've worked to try to put in into the design to help address in some way. Just for everyone's benefit, I think it might be fair for us to talk about originally what a conventional subdivision proposal might look like. And so again, a conventional subdivision, it would be very much like you would look on your screen. Don't hold me to literal scale and everything else, but this is something that the engineers put together to illustrate the point in terms of a conventional subdivision plan. At this point, it would generate, it appears to be 144 total lots, which is 10 more than our proposal. It would also essentially take up, as you can see, the entirety of the actual 60-acre plat and would not provide for green space like we are talking about. So this would be a conventional subdivision proposal under the regulations if we were to go down that route. That being said, this is, again, an open space subdivision. So what we're talking about ultimately doing is reducing the lot size, clustering them together, and then preserving green space throughout the entire lot so that, again, you can incorporate residential spots while still preserving that natural topography and natural characteristics of the area around it. So I do think it's important, again, just to highlight for anyone who may be watching the difference between what a conventional plan might look like and what our plan actually looks like. In summary, DHGA respectfully requests the Planning Commission to approve the following variances. And again, we've talked about these, but I just want to reiterate them again. A variance to reduce the minimum lot width from 80 feet to 55 feet. A variance to reduce the minimum front yard setback from 35 feet to 30 feet. A variance to reduce the minimum side yard setback from 7 feet to 5 feet. And a variance to reduce the minimum side yard total setback from 25 feet to 10 feet. Again, that's provided for under both the zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulation sections that you see on the screen. Additionally, we are asking the commission to approve the following waivers. One, a waiver relating to the mandate that residential lots have frontage on and vehicular access from local access streets or private roads only and not on subcollector streets. And two, a waiver of the regulation relating to the mandate that open space sections or clusters not generate an ADT that exceeds 250 vehicles. I put on the slide if needed, because again, we talk about the design may actually eliminate the need for that, but to the extent that is needed, we are asking you all to make that waiver request as well. And that is provided for, again, under those subdivision regulations. And of course, after all of that, we would respectfully ask the Planning Commission to give final approval of this preliminary plan to construct the Dogwood Estates subdivision on the basis that the plan comports with both the Oldham County Comprehensive Plan and the subdivision regulations by, among other items, promoting the health, safety, and welfare of Oldham County, promoting the character of Oldham County and encouraging orderly and beneficial development, protecting and conserving the value of land in Oldham County and minimizing conflict among the uses of land and buildings, and for any other reason so determined by the Planning Commission that may be appropriate under state and local law. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. At this point, I and my colleagues will be more than happy to take any questions.
And we'll get to that shortly. Thank you, Mr. Swansburg. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of this application? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to testimony and questions by those who are opposed to the application. Is anyone opposed to the application who wishes to provide testimony? Please approach, get your name and address, and get you sworn in.
Donald Adams, 2401 Massey School Road. And
Let's get your address, let's get you sworn in first, please.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I have a problem with the Zell Smith, the engineer, I have two things. First of all, he said that the traffic studies is 1,300 now, and you have a road that you're asking a variance on for 500 vehicles a day, and that is over 1,500, so I don't understand why there's not a traffic studies being done on this. And also, the Zell Smith has a curve that is banked wrong, and it's highly dangerous. And anyway, that's my problem with the thing with the
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Anything additional?
please.
Anything additional?
I can answer the first question. if you
Okay,
want.
let's go ahead and indulge.
So,
Mhm.
Mr. Adams, I can answer the first question you had, and it is confusing, but that is an internal requirement, not external. So the waiver is for an internal road network waiver, not for what the impact is or the number of vehicles on Zale Smith Road itself. I know it sounds like voodoo magic or something, but it really is an internal requirement that no segment be greater than 250 vehicles, not out on Zale Smith. So then when you take the collective number of trips coming out of this subdivision, and then you look at the average daily trips on Zale Smith Road, and look at the peak hour trips coming from this development, it doesn't meet the requirements for a traffic study. A little confusing, but again, that waiver is internal.
Internal. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Second question, I'm not sure I can answer or they need to answer. Zale Smith.
You know, we're going to have to leave that to applicant and rebuttal, and perhaps if the county engineer has any input, welcome to hear that as well, but
As far as the geometry of Zale Smith Road, I'd be glad to, if you can come to my office afterwards and show me which one you're concerned with. We can take a look at it from the county's perspective. I'm not aware of significant collisions or incidents of road departures, but we can look at that for you. And if it's something we need to address, we will.
And Jim, just when you said you're not aware of accidents, you search the state's crash data.
Well, that's how we do that. I have not done that for that specific location as of today, but I can do that. I'm not aware of a prevalence of incidents there, though, from people reporting them. We would have to investigate it, though.
understood. Thank you, Mr. Silliman. Anyone else wishing to provide opposition testimony, please approach. Same drill, we'll get your name and address, get you sworn.
Sharon Adams, 2401 Massey School Road, LaGrange, sorry.
Do you solemnly swear, raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for you guys, and I think we approached this before.
I need to get you
The,
closer to that mic so we can pick you up on the record, okay?
I think we spoke about this before, but I'm not sure how we left it. The conservation spaces that are going to be there, who cares for those? You have houses with these tiny lots and this fabulous green space. Who is going to care for that? Is there going to be an HOA for this, a homeowners association? Is it just going to be left for the animals to roam, which would be ideal? But, you know, I'm just concerned about how that other space is going to be cared for.
Thank you. Mr. Swansburg, can you give us a response to that, please? Okay,
Excellent question. Thank you for that. And I do remember we talked about
closer
this.
to the mic, please.
I do remember we talked about this as part of the neighborhood plan. So the idea actually is that for conservation areas or those open space areas, initially the developer would actually have responsibility for maintaining that. Eventually, however, after a certain number of lots are sold off, the homeowners association would be responsible for maintaining those areas. That is the plan, yes.
Ms. Adams, anything additional? No. Thank you. All right. So at this moment, we'll move into questioning of the applicant and those opposing the application by the commission. Commissioners, who's up? Mr. Hampton.
I'm not sure you can answer this. This is more of a bookkeeping, but I just want it on the record. Back in the back on the detention basin, should that be number 4? You got 2 3s.
Get your name and address for the record before you
Derek
respond.
Triplett.
Thank you.
Landscape architect with Land Design and Development, 503 Washburn Avenue, Louisville, Kentucky, 40222.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a typo. That far south basin,
Yes.
far right on the plan should be basin number 4.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I just
Good
wanted to
catch.
be sure everybody knew I was paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. You want to take the rest of the day off, right? All right, who else?
Mr. King,
Mr. Marsh, please.
following up on Ms. Adams' question, is there any space that's reserved for recreation? We're going to make the lawns, the areas very, very small around these houses. Is there a place for children to congregate, to play? Is that planned into this anywhere? I don't see it in the map. I saw sidewalks, but
Name and address, please.
Billy Delker, 4751 Fox Run Road, Buckner, Kentucky, 40010. So to kind of follow up with the question, I mean, in the beginning, you know, the developer we will set up the HOA from the very beginning, from the time there's one homeowner. So the HOA will exist from the very beginning, first of all. The developer has to subsidize that to take care of that for quite some time. But I don't know that I have a final answer on how that's going to play out. What I would envision is some of the areas that are flatter might end up having some recreational area or gathering areas, that kind of thing. But there's a large part of this property that'll also just be left, you know, kind of more in its natural state as well. But there will be some areas that would be, you know, for gathering, kids playing, that kind of thing.
there are none designated right now.
We don't have anything planned specifically right now.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Marsh, anything additional? Others? Mr. Urban, please.
You're asking for a front yard setback variance from 35 feet to 30, and one of the issues that we always have with especially short setbacks is parking of vehicles in driveways, especially as they relate to overhanging into sidewalks. Do you have any kind of exhibit to show us that how cars would be able to park here without, if you put 2 cars front to rear, would they hang over the sidewalk? There are many examples in LaGrange where, like in Washington Manor as an example, the cars are always over the sidewalk and you can't walk down the sidewalk because the car's in the way. And again, when you're asking for variance, are you going to have double wide driveways? Are you going to have additional parking spaces? How are you going to handle that?
So we don't have a variance or an exhibit, but to your point, these will be 18-foot wide driveways, so double the width. And so you could have 2 cars side by side that would fit within that 30-foot setback without overhanging onto the sidewalk.
Okay, good. Anything else? Don't move. With respect to parking again, right? Will the HOA restrictions take up the subject of on-street parking?
So this is within the city of LaGrange, who does not permit on-street parking anyways. So there will be no on-street parking.
Very well, thank you. Mr. Swansburg, I think the next one's for you. In terms of HOA restrictions and such, how do those become binding on the owners?
Ultimately, we've got deed restrictions that we're actually going to be including we've got deed restrictions that we're going to be including as part of this proposal.
Thank you.
So they'll be binding on every owner.
Thank you very much. And next one is for Mr. Silliman. Stub roads. I know we're at a conceptual presentation here. Are these stub roads, and as they are conceptually illustrated, usable on adjoining properties? In your opinion?
During TRC review, we had requested that a couple of the stub roads be outfitted with temporary turnarounds, and they have shown those, so.
All right, but I mean, is there an approach on the adjacent parcel, should it ever come into development, that actually makes that a usable
Not that I'm
adjoining
aware of.
space?
Well,
Is
not at
this
this
something
time.
that you address at construction stage, or how is
right
this?
away-
There's
the right-of-way
nothing on that
goes-
adjoining-
The
there's
right-of-way
nothing on the
goes right
adjoining
to the
property.
property line. And you can modify the roadway by taking out the temporary turnaround and putting a curb and gutter and.
So those would be
continuing the road.
usable if adjoining property developed?
Yes, they would be modified at that point.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, that's all I have. Who else has questions? All right.
I actually got
Mr.
one
Urban,
more.
please.
You're also asking for a waiver of the requirement for the section that does not exceed 250 vehicles per day. And technically, you could connect that back section to Massey School Road, which would eliminate essentially the number of trips that would end up at the front part of this subdivision. I'm not saying that's a good idea. The previous plan that was approved, and now it's expired, did have a connection to Massey School Road. I'd like the engineer maybe to talk about the reason why you wouldn't want to do that, just so the commission has some basis for saying, okay, there's an alternative, but it isn't a good one. Or that it is a good one.
So we intentionally made the decision not to connect to Massey School Road just based on the condition of that road. Just looking at it, it's more of a glorified driveway in that location. And so it was a substandard public road. And so that was the decision we made to not connect there.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Mr. Marsh? Ms. Jones, please.
To follow up on that question, so there's no concern with this many houses and many people not having a second exit onto the
That's
Massey
correct. It
School
doesn't
or-
meet the threshold for a second entrance.
Okay, and my other question was, what is the approximate size and the cost these houses will be selling for the applicant?
I'd like for one of them to answer that question. So it's a great question. I don't know that I honestly can tell you exactly what the cost of the houses are going to be. I mean, from the time, assuming we get approval today, the process, we're 12 to 24 months away from ever building a house, and the cost of housing inflation has been going crazy these last 2 or 3 years. So I honestly would feel uncomfortable telling you the cost of what these houses will be. I can give you a comparison of what we've kind of modeled our restrictions off of. Is a subdivision in Buckner, or technically LaGrange address, but it's called the Commons of Cedar Point. So the houses would be in that 1,400 to 2,200 square foot range is what we're envisioning today. Could be some on slabs, could be some on basements. Those houses today are selling anywhere from the low fours to the mid sixes. So that would be the best comparison I could give you today.
And so I know you mentioned a double driveway, so it'll be like a double forward-facing
There will be
garage?
garages on all the houses,
Okay.
yes.
And just while you're up there, even if for some reason the house only had a single-car garage, you would still make a two-car wide driveway?
Yes, I'd be fine including that.
All right, Ms. Jones, anything additional? All right. Mr. Marsh, did you have a question? Okay. Mr. Douglas, please.
This is for the attorney. I keep going back to things that have been said about the zoning district, and you were talking about open space zoning district. So when you talk about the subdivision developmental plan, and you were talking about zoning district, were you just discussing open spaces for the subdivision plan, or were you discussing open spaces for CO1 and R2 and incorporating it as a divisional or subdivision plan? Because in one of your slides, it said that due to the open space, your CO1, and I believe if you go back to it, you mentioned something about the zoning district. So were you incorporating both of those districts? Or you just, I guess it's a legal question. You were talking about the density.
Is this the one you're talking about, sir? 51%, 30.89 acres of the total lot.
Yes, and there might be one after that too.
So we've got, this is another one we talked about for building setbacks.
Correct.
And we've talked about so for me, again, lawyer math, 92% was me taking the total lot amount and then looking at the plan and dividing how much of that was identified as R2 and how much of that was identified as CO1, and then me coming up with the 92% versus 8% on that front, given the total amount of the total plat of 60 acres, basically. So,
Correct.
So that is on that front. So, and then we talked again before, other than lot 9 and 10, we're having the fractional corners of them being in the CO. Everything else is within the R2 zone in terms of residential lots. So in terms of open space, what we're looking at is the totality of the entire plot, which is a little more than 60 acres. And as long as we're talking about more than 50% of that total acreage is going to be open space, and that meets the threshold for the regulations.
Okay. That's the only thing I was confused on because.
And I may have misspoken, I apologize.
Well, I mean, it's confusing for me because when you have two zoning districts, and we have a lot of those throughout Oldham County, you got CO1 and R1, whatever, R2. And it's just confusing when someone says our open spaces for the zoning district for this plan, and you're making your calculations on, because I'm a big proponent on a mixed use of zoning, but when you said zoning district, it should be zoning districts.
Yes, sir, and that's correct, yes.
Okay.
So when we're talking about, right, there are two within the total 60 acre, a little more than 60 acres. There are two total zones there.
Right.
But for our purposes, again, 92% approximately is R2, 8%, really more along the streamline we're talking about, other than, again, that very small fraction of it. So overall, when we talk about the setbacks and variances, we're looking at the R2 standard for that purpose.
Okay. I have one for the builder. I got to go back to the parking and actually the driveways. So when you place a home, how much driveway will be left available since there's the setback we're reducing? So how many feet of driveway will be there?
So like from the back of the sidewalk, which would be about where where the right of way is, there'll be 30 feet from there to the start of the house, and then you'd have about another 11 feet, I think, typically from the sidewalk to the curb. Does that make sense? So you're going to have, I mean, I guess there is a possibility some of these could have one-car garages, but even if we do that, we could have the double wide driveway. So you're going to have, on a typical home that would have a two-car garage, you could have two cars in the garage, and then 30 feet from the front of that garage to the start of the sidewalk.
So in reality, there's a possibility that if you got high school kids, there's going to be more cars probably than it's going to be able to park in those driveways, correct?
I mean, I guess you could still have, two cars in the garage, two cars in the driveway, potentially more than that, depending upon the size of the vehicle, I don't know I wish I knew for sure what the demographic of the buyer would be, for this house. I mean, I can tell you from our other projects that we've done very similar to this in the Commons of Cedar Point or the villas at Claymont Springs, there's not a lot of kids of driving age that live in those neighborhoods. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it's not our primary demographic.
Since you brought up Claymont Springs, because I can't testify, has there been issues at Claymont Springs of parking on the street there?
I mean, we don't manage, we've turned that over a long time ago, but I'm not aware of any. We still manage the HOA in the Commons of Cedar Point right now, and there's been zero issue in there because we have no kids of driving age in those 30 homes or so that we've built in there so far.
Okay, thanks, Billy.
Yep.
So but I'm going to continue, and I maybe want Derek to answer this, but if you look on the plan, there's a proposed road cross-section, and it's 50 foot wide, which meets our regulations. If you add up those dimensions, it's less than 50 feet. So there is within the right-of-way, there's additional space. The setback is from the edge of the right-of-way, not from the back of the sidewalk or back of curb, it's from the right-of-way. So you have a 50-foot right-of-way. At the end of that, you have a 30-foot setback. What I'm asking is, and you don't have that in your proposed cross-section, is, so what else is in that 50-foot right-of-way that isn't described by a dimension here on your typical?
So the verge is what varies. If you look at that cross section, the dimensions for the verge and the sidewalk area is marked with varies, and so that's the difference there. So you have your right-of-way line. 1 foot off of that right-of-way line is your setback or is your sidewalk, and then I could scale it off for you, but you might have an 8-foot verge or so before getting to the edge of pavement.
So this is a concern of the city of LaGrange. It has been on these small lots for a long, long time. And what I think what I'd like to suggest is that you as the engineers and developer work with the county and the city to come up with an arrangement of that verge and that sidewalk included in the setback that would help to make sure that the cars aren't parked across the sidewalk. There are utility easements. I mean, we've grappled with this and we don't have a standard. And we never made a standard. And the difficulty for you all is you don't know where, are you going to have water on one side? Are you going to have the sewer on the other side? Where's your electric utilities? What's the verge width? So in order to satisfy this question, Mr. Douglas, and myself, and I'm sure the city, I think the real question is, are you willing to commit that you'll work on a scaled drawing that shows the arrangement of the grading, the curb and gutter, the verge, the sidewalk, and utilities in a best effort to avoid cars parking across the sidewalk? If the commission is going to consider approval, I think we need something like that. It's not difficult, it's just we got to figure it out.
Yes, sir. And those are elements we'd have to work through anyways, as far as defining the grades and the street design and where utility easements are located and whatnot. And so certainly in doing so, we will take that into consideration to work with those two entities to make sure we don't have cars blocking the sidewalks.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, we will move into rebuttal from the applicant. Mr. Swansburg?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that there's necessarily a rebuttal per se. I think we had a lot of questions that we were able to address along the way, so I don't have anything additional that I would like to add at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. and Ms. Adams, this is your opportunity for any rebuttal to things that are previously recorded on the record. Any rebuttal that you'd like to offer?
Well, just to follow up on Mr. Douglas, and thank you so much for your observations. We really appreciate those. About the parking, 134 houses. Everybody has a graduation, everybody has a wedding, everybody has a birthday. 4 cars in a driveway is okay. All of this green space around, though, would some of the neighbors say, hey, there's an empty field right there. Let's park 20 cars over here while we have our whatever. And it's no longer than a conservation space. It becomes a parking lot. It becomes, it just destroys the environment then. Because as we know, I'm a member of Kentucky Waterways Alliance. And as we know, anything that you put on the ground is going to eventually sink into our water table and affect that. And that is one of my main concern in all of this.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Swansburg? I think now's the time.
I would go ahead and suggest, as a matter of fact, that whether it's the developer or the HOA, depending on the status of the property at the time, is going to be the one whose job is going to be to enforce the various limitations on the use of the property, and that is going to include that green space. So if you have a situation like say a summer party or graduation party where somebody might say, hey, there's a whole lot of green space over there, I'm just going to park all my cars over there, I would submit that the HOA can actually come in and essentially enforce it as a green space and have the cars removed if necessary. And so I don't think that there would be an ultimate concern about it being used as a permanent parking lot. And we'd submit that a strong HOA or the developer prior to that point, as long as he's got control, would be the one to go in and say, you got to get these cars out of here. If not, we're going to forcibly remove them.
Thank you, Mr. Swansburg. All right, Mr. and Ms. Adams, final statements. Anything else to add? Please.
I would like to add about Massey School Road. If it's decided later on to widen a Massey School Road, that section of it, would they come over into their area that's supposed to be open space? Because there's not, anyway.
Understood conceptually. Yeah. Mr. Urban, any kind of?
When I asked the question about whether or not they could connect to Massey School Road, it was somewhat of a redundant question only because I knew the conditions, but I wanted them to put in the record that it was wider. We're not proposing that they connect, simply because I don't think any of us agree that it should be widened. So, but if it were, it would come on, the right-of-way would be taken on both sides of the existing right-of-way, which would include some of their property.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Urban. Final statement from the applicant, Mr. Swansburg.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, we've spent a good amount of time, a healthy amount of time this morning talking about this proposal, and I appreciate everyone's time and questions, comments, including those from the neighbors. And they've been with us from the beginning on this, and we've talked a lot about the concerns that they've raised throughout this process. Again, just to reiterate for our purposes, this is an open space plan. The idea behind this plan ultimately is to provide 134 lots and combine it with green space, which allows, again, the creation of a residential subdivision while also promoting, again, that rural or agricultural area of that part of the county that many folks very much enjoy. So I don't have a whole lot to add other than at this point we've submitted to you all that we've got 4 variance requests that we are making, 2 waiver requests, and then ultimately final approval of the preliminary plan. The first 4, again, are simply just discussions about the lot size themselves to reduce the amount so we can include that additional green space within the overall plat. The 2 waivers we've talked about in terms of the connector of streets A and B at that location and allowing a waiver simply to have frontage on the remainder of the road going to the entranceway of the subdivision. And the set latter part, of course, being that, again, we've talked about possibly already obviating the need for a waiver by virtue of breaking up that southernmost cluster into 2 different clusters. But to the extent that there is a request, we would just simply note that this is part of an overall plan for a neighborhood. We think it's a good plan. We think it's a better plan that, in fact, has been proposed and approved by this body in the past. And it's good compared to a potential alternative for this plan without all the requests that we've got here. And with that, we would respectfully ask that you all approve those requests that we have made. We appreciate everyone's time again, Mr. Chairman. I think that's it for us. I appreciate that. And whatever time I might have, I would yield back to the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Swansburg. All right, commissioners, we're going to hear from Mr. Urban about what comes next. Then before we get into decision-making, we're going to take a short break, give you time to think about it, frame up what kinds of actions you wish to take. But anyway, Mr. Urban.
So again, you've heard not only the staff report, but from the applicant, a group of not only variances, but waivers. As always, consider evidence and testimony you heard today, whether or not you agree or disagree in making a potential motion. I want to point out that the applicant has submitted a justification statement for both waivers and the variances. They are on the back of page 5 and the front of page 6 in your staff report. Read those and ask yourself a question in either making a motion or considering a motion that's on the floor, whether or not you agree with these things or not. I want to add one thing about the side yard setbacks. About 7 or 8 years ago, when we were going through some changes to the zoning ordinance regulations, and knowing that there was a desire for smaller setbacks, especially in just in the residential subdivision regulations, we recommended a 5-foot on each side setback. And it went through study review committee, it went to the planning commission, and then at the fiscal court level, they didn't approve it. And the simple reason was that they knew there's a process for granting variances. And they said, rather than just putting it as a right in the regulations, let's ask the planning commission to consider whether or not variances for side yard setbacks in particular are reasonable based on the development plan. So I wanted to put that context on the idea of the side yard setback variances. They didn't say, no, we never want to see 5 and 5, but they said there's a process, and this is the process we're in today, being able to consider a variance for a particular development. And now your job is to consider, in that one in particular, whether or not it's reasonable given that this is an open space subdivision.
All right, thank you, Mr. Urban. So with that, short break. Okay. All right, everyone, thank you for indulging us at a small break. So, commissioners, floor is open. We'll begin with the discussion of waivers.
Okay. So.
Oh, I'm sorry, floor is not open.
no.
Let's have a description first. There we go.
What do you
Please
want?
go.
Again, so coming back to the discussion and the issues that you need to consider, you have, and we're combining a total of 3 variances and actually 2 waivers that we're combining into one motion. So you said you want to do the waivers first. So if you look on page 5 of 7 in your staff report, there are sample motions for either approval or denial of the waivers. And the waiver is from section 5.12C of the subdivision regulations to allow lots to have frontage and vehicular access on a subcollector street. That's number 1. And to allow a cluster lot section to generate an ADT that exceeds 250 vehicles. So because they're really in the same, like Brian said in his staff report, they're part of the same section, we feel that you can take both of these as one motion. The only condition of approval would be that the waivers shall only apply to the preliminary plan review application considered at the June 25th, 2024 Oldham County Planning Commission public hearing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Urban. Commissioners.
And again, let me add, on the back of page 5, there's justification. You got to put in your motion either to approve or deny, whether you either believe the evidence and testimony one way or another, approval or denial, and you can rely on the applicant's justification for the waiver if you choose.
Okay, good. All right, commissioners. Floor is open. Ms. Nasser,
All right.
you're up.
Okay. Considering docket PZ-24-009, I make a motion to approve based on testimony and evidence today, this motion to approve the waiver allowing the lot frontages on a sub-collector street, as well as a cluster as shown in the plat map that generates an ADT greater than 250 feet, to allow those waivers from section 5.12C of the subdivision regulations, due to the fact that it would cause a hardship. The plan presented today creates a plan that generates more open space than plan previously presented, and actually reduces, based on testimony and evidence today, the number of lots from the previous plan, which gives best use of the land and creates a nice space for the subdivision that complies with the county subdivision regulations as well.
Thank you, Ms. Nasser. Mr. Baxter.
Ms. Nasser, on page 5 of 7, under the suggested motions, there's some language. I assume that you would incorporate that it does not cause a detriment to the public good and does not impair the intent of the subdivision regulations?
I agree. I also want to incorporate the binding element stated by Jim Urban.
Very good, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a motion.
Second.
I have a second. Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Discussion. Seeing none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Ms. Edgar?
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Elder?
Yes.
Ms. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Hampton?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Nasser?
Yes.
Ms. Walzer?
Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And the waivers have requested have been approved on a vote of 9-0. Mr. Urban?
Okay, the next item are the variances, and we're going to take, there are going to be three separate motions. The first one is for the required minimum lot width. It is a variance of 25 feet. The lot width requirement is 80 feet. They're proposing a 55-foot lot width, and so that would be a variance of 25 feet. I want to remind you that the subdivision regulations allow for this authority when you're considering an open space subdivision plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Urban. Commissioners, floor is open. Lot width variance. Ms. Jones?
Regarding docket PZ 24009, I would like to make the motion to approve the first variance regarding the lot width. And that is to, I believe, 55 feet. So the requested variance of 25 feet, based on that it does not adversely affect the public health, and it will not alter the essential character of the general vicinity, and will not cause a hazard to the public, and will not allow an unreasonable circumvention of the requirements of the zoning. And based on the evidence and testimony presented today, and the having the smaller lot width and the greater open space will is a good use of this space.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Baxter?
Ms. Jones, if you were to refer to the application filed wherein it shows the justification for the variance, there were some things that were listed in there. Do you incorporate the applicant's justification into your motion?
That is correct.
And I forgot to mention that there's, and this is going to be repetitive, but the variance shall only apply to the preliminary plan review application considered at the June 25th, 2024 Oldham County Planning Commission public hearing as a condition of approval.
Yes, correct.
Then we have a good motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioners, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Davis, thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, we'll move into roll call vote. Ms. Edgar?
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Ms. Walzer?
Yes.
Ms. Nasser?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Hampton?
Yes.
Ms. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Elder?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And the motion to approve the variance as requested for lot width has been approved on a vote of 9-0. Mr. Urban?
Okay, so the sample motions for either approval or denial are exactly the same for each one of these. You're going to just, again, keep reconsidering the same approval or denial. The next one is for the minimum front yard setback. It's a requirement of 35 feet. Their proposed minimum front yard is 30 feet, so their requested variance is 5 feet. It does include a condition of approval that it only applies to the plan that was considered today. And also, I'm going to add in that the applicant work with the county and the city to design right-of-way, et cetera, to best avoid parking across the sidewalk. And also a second one where it sounds as though they've agreed to that there is a minimum driveway width of 2 cars, whether it's a 1-car or 2-car garage. And I'm going to ask the applicant whether they agree with both of those conditions on the variance should the commission consider approving the front yard setback.
Applicant signifies agreement.
Just so I'm recorded, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Commissioners, floor is open.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Marsh.
Regarding docket PZ 24009, I move that we approve the variance for the front yard setback per statements made recently, but also because it does support the development of the open space subdivision and allows for the conservation of the green space and is in line with the regulations and preliminary plan. And the two items that Mr. Urban suggested also be incorporated.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. You also wish to incorporate the language that says it will not cause a detriment to public good.
Yes, sir.
And will not impair the basic intent of
Absolutely.
subdivision regs. Thank you. Mr. Baxter?
We have a good motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Elder, thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, we will move into roll call vote. Ms. Edgar?
Mr. Hampton.
Yes.
Ms. Davis.
Yes.
Mr. Marsh.
Yes.
Ms. Walzer.
Yes.
Mr. Douglas.
Yes.
Mr. Elder.
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Nasser.
Yes.
Ms. Kraus.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And the variance to approve the front yard setback has been approved on a vote of 9-0.
Okay, the next motion on the variance is we're going to combine the two because they're closely related, and that's for the minimum side yard setback. So the first is essentially that the minimum is 7 feet. They're proposing 5 feet, so that's a requested variance of 2 feet. The second part of that is combined. The side yard setbacks are supposed to be 25 feet altogether. What they're proposing is that there's only a minimum setback of 10 feet total, so that would be a 15-foot. So let me explain what that means. Essentially, as I explained earlier, when we proposed to fiscal court that we actually allow in the zoning ordinance a minimum of 5-foot setback for each side, and they said, bring it to the planning commission because we have the right and the ability to grant variances. This would be a 5-foot setback on each side. So for clarity, the numbers you got to state, but it is a 5-foot and a 5-foot on each side. So in between houses, there would be a total of 10 feet. So just to get a picture in your head of what this variance request is. There is also, of course, you add your reasoning, and the one condition of approval that the variance only applies to the preliminary plan review application considered at the June 25th, 2024 Oldham County Planning Commission public hearing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Urban. Commissioners, floor is open. Discussion on 5-yard setback, or the side yard setback, yes. Ms. Jones?
Okay, regarding docket number PZ 24009, the variance requested concerning the side yard and combined side yard setbacks of 2 feet on each property and a combined minimum total of 10 feet instead of the 25 feet combined. I'd make a motion to approve this variance because it will not adversely affect the public health and will not alter the essential character of the general vicinity and will not cause a hazard to the public and will not allow an unreasonable circumvention of the requirements of the zoning regulation in order to allow this. In order to allow the minimum side yard setback of 5 feet and the minimum total for both side yard setback of 10 feet. And this condition of approval will only apply to the preliminary plan review considered at this meeting on June 25th, 2024.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Baxter?
We have an adequate motion, Mr. Chairman.
A motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Mr.
I'll
Marsh?
second.
Thank you. All right, discussion? Move into roll call vote. Ms. Edgar?
Ms. Walzer?
Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Hampton?
Yes.
Ms. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Elder?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Nasser?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And the request for variance of side yard setbacks as requested has been approved on a vote of 9-0. Mr. Urban?
Okay, so on page 6 of 7 in your packet, since you now have approved all the waivers and variances, you can consider the preliminary plan as it would be in compliance with the regulations plus the waivers and variances. There's a motion to either approve or deny the preliminary plan, starting on page 6. There are 4 conditions of approval on the preliminary plan to consider. First is there shall be no significant changes to the Dogwood Estates Open Space Subdivision Preliminary Plan as presented at the June 25th, 2024 Oldham County Planning Commission public hearing without review and approval of the commission. The second one is the issuance of building permits for single-family residents shall be limited to 25 per calendar year, and I've added beginning at record plat in compliance with the school capacity standard determined by the Oldham County Board of Education. Number 4 is the Dogwood Estates Open Space Subdivision construction plans must comply with all established federal, state, and local ordinances and requirements at the time of approval, and the record plat will not be approved until all standards are satisfied. And then I want to just add one final one, affirming the conditions of approval that were placed on the waivers and variances that were granted.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. All right, guys, everybody clear? Any questions?
Yeah.
It's a small point, Mr. Chairman, but he added a binding element that Mr. Swansburg previously agreed to, but since it's a new motion, we need him to affirm that that's acceptable.
Mr. Chairman, it would seem odd for me to be in conflict with myself, so we would agree with the previous binding elements here as well.
Thank you for that absence of drama. All right, commissioners, floor is open. Who would like to make a motion? Ms. Nasser, is that you?
All right.
You're up.
I'd like to make a motion to approve docket PZ 24-009. Motion to approve the preliminary subdivision plan, open space subdivision plan, I should say, that was presented today, as it ensures the future growth of the county and works with the land use compatibility as recommended in LU-1-1, reducing. It currently is reducing the footprint as previously planned, which is not providing a detriment to the community, to the public, rather providing a better use of the plan and the topography that exists and use of the land as it occurs today. Also do see is that the preliminary subdivision plan for open space subdivision provides a good use of the land as it applies to the surrounding area as well. This shall include the binding elements, the 4 binding elements as stated by Jim Urban as well.
Thank you, Ms. Nasser. Mr. Baxter?
We have a good motion, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion on the floor, Commissioners. Mr. Hampton, thank you. Discussion. All right, we will move into roll call vote. Ms. Edgar?
Mr. Hampton,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Mr. Marsh,
Yes.
Ms. Walzer,
Yes.
Ms. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Elder,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Kraus,
Yes.
Ms. Nasser.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And PZ-24-009 preliminary plan has been approved on a vote of 9-0. Thank you. All right, Mr. Urban.
Just for the record, docket number PZ 24-010, an application filed by Sohol and Cindy Investments LLC for a site plan review with waivers for a proposed convenience store and fuel station located at 800 West Jefferson Street in LaGrange, postponed or tabled per the request of the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. All right, anything additional? Any other business?
No.
Two things, and I'll take them sequentially. We do have a study review committee meeting scheduled for this Thursday evening at 5 o'clock. We have two items basically on the agenda. One is to tie up the discussion at the previous SRC meeting about the IPD regulations, and then the new item is the conversation starting on how we would regulate medical cannabis businesses. The other item would be that at your July meeting, we do have the one application that's been tabled, and we do have new applications for you all also.
Thank you, Mr. Fogel. With the new listing here that is before us with respect to commissioners and contact info, this is always a great time to talk about training opportunities as well, how many training hours we need to get, and where any of those might be on the horizon.
Well, let's see if I can pull up I mentioned last meeting, I think, that in September, KIPTA is going to have a all-day training session. Those are usually really great. Let's see, I didn't put it on my calendar, so I don't remember the date, but you'll get plenty of notice for it sometime in September. We didn't bring the current list of who has hours yet in training, but I think everybody's pretty close, or at least have been paying attention to the hours.
Thank
We'll
you.
let you know if you're lagging behind.
Sorry for the surprise. Thank you for that. All right, anything else? Commissioners, good to the cause? All right, seeing none, we will be adjourned. Thank you, everyone.